here early, and I'd been kind of sequestered upstairs in the office, and it was getting late, and I thought, oh, usually somebody's in here by now. And then I had 2 or 3 people coming upstairs, so I knew I wasn't alone. But I think y'all waited later tonight to show up than you usually do. And I can understand with all this weather. But I do want to thank you all for being here. And I think, we've got some people who haven't been with us in a long time, like Mr. Gary over here. And we have some new members. We have the Prices, Jim and Connie back there, who are brand new first-time members. Who else do we have that you might not know or recognize? Do we have any other guests with us? Well, we were expecting a couple of people with Carol Casey, but Carol isn't here either.
Another meeting is on the way now. She'll be here.
Oh, okay, so she'll be here soon. Okay. Well, we're delighted with each and every one of you, and welcome you back, and welcome you to bring somebody else with you whenever you can. There's the lovely Carol. Oh, me. Laughter is wonderful medicine, so I'm glad we've had a little. I hope that most of you were able to be at the concert. I felt like it was absolutely a wonderful event.
I've heard some good reports from it.
I have had a lot of people comment to me on, and it's been interesting to me because we seem to hit several different tastes. Different people have commented on different acts. The only thing that I saw wrong with it was the house wasn't full, and it should have been. I mean, it was people who missed it, really missed a wonderful evening. Pardon?
Did we make it?
That's in the treasurer's report, and yes, we did. Not what we were hoping for, but yes, we did make money. And I'm ready, Miss Sheila, for the reading of the minutes. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Sheila Wade with the minutes.
Good afternoon, or good evening. I guess it's dark, it's evening, I guess. Minutes from the January 26, 2016 meeting of the Polk County Historical Society. The meeting began with a tour of the historical Sunshine Cottage located at 311 North College Street at 7 p.m. After the tour, the meeting then moved to the museum building and was called to order by President Ellen Hester. All members and visitors were made welcome. Alan Hunt, whose family has owned the Sunshine Cottage since 1950, spoke briefly about the house. Greg Rose, if I could read. Greg Gray spoke about the cottage's use as a home for girls and the efforts of the local citizens to get the cottage into operation. Ellen said that she was working with the Northwest Georgia Regional Development Commission, the National Trust, and other agencies to get an elevator for our building. Minutes from the previous meeting were read, corrected, and approved. Old business, a special election will be held at the February meeting to elect a member at large to the board due to the untimely death of Mr. Eddie Neal. Mr. Neal was a valuable member of the Historical Society, and sympathy was expressed to his family. The treasurer's report was read by Emily Shaw. Motion to accept the report as read was made by Bobby McElwee. In new business, Greg Gray asked for a $50 donation to purchase an ad in the Welch Fest booklet. The donation was approved. The Welch Fest is planned for Saturday, March the 19th in Rockmart. Tickets for the February 6th concert in honor of Mr. John Thomas are on sale for $10. Proceeds from this event will benefit the Polk County Historical Society. Committee reports. Angela Bentley needs help on Saturday, February the 6th after the concert to serve refreshments to the musicians. A sign-up sheet for refreshments for future meetings was made available. Carol Casey announced programs for our meetings for the next several months. New acquisitions, Toby Adamson donated a copy of the 1838 Acts of the General Assembly of the State of Georgia and a copy of a Methodist hymnal published in 1874. The next meeting will be held on Tuesday, February the 23rd at 7 o'clock. Sally Peak closed our meeting with prayer. Many thanks to Emily Shaw for the delicious refreshments. Meeting was adjourned.
Move enrollment as presented.
I can't even remember if that needs a second, but anyway, all in favor? Minutes are approved as read. Thank you, Sheila. We'll have the treasurer's report, Ms. Emily Shaw.
Okay, we have a current bank balance of $9,370.53. Of that, $6,180.53 is our operating money, and $3,190 was our net income for the concert. Now,
And we can certainly thank Mr. Bobby McElwee for that because he did underwrite all the expenses for that concert. So we wouldn't have made that without him. And that is showing, part of that at least, is showing in our books as a like-kind contribution should we need it for whatever future needs. Under old business, I did not call a board meeting as I should have, and we do not, as a nominating committee, have a name to
email communications with a lady who worked in Memphis, Tennessee, and she works in the library doing digital scanning of all their records. And the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue that's in the park there in Memphis is under attack. They're wanting to, the city of Memphis is wanting to tear it down, dig up him and his wife, scatter the ashes to the wind. And this group had done research on that statue. It was made in Paris, shipped over here, and it was unloaded in Savannah, and the Seaboard Airlines agreed to transport it to Memphis. And Cedartown was the only route, the route through Cedartown was the only one that had passageways wide enough to get it through. And whenever they got up here, the viaduct at College Street was too low and they couldn't get through. Nathan Bedford Forrest statue in 1905 spent the evening on sidetrack, and they ended up taking the wheels off of the flatbed, setting them on the track and dragging him under, and then jacking it back up and putting the wheels back on, and he went on his way. And I found the 1905 newspaper article, and it said that Nathan Bedford Forrest caused a lot of mass confusion whenever he was in the Civil War, and he was still doing it after his death. So, the lady came this Saturday, and her and her husband were here, and she brought me this coin that they were selling to raise money to get the lawyers to battle the city of Memphis to save the statue. And I'll pass this around. This is my personal, but I'm going to put it here at the museum. I'll take a look at it. And I didn't catch their names. Did you happen to?
I have it upstairs somewhere, I think.
Whenever I come in, she hugged me and acted like she knew who I was. So.
I'm supposed to remember that name from the email correspondence.
Okay, well it is. And Carol brought, and I haven't got to look at it, but she brought us a store ledger from the Garner.
Dixie and Roger Josie, yes, the Garner
It was a Garner store out in the Eastham Hill area. And I believe that was pretty much all that we've had this month. So that's all I got.
Okay, yeah, Ditsy and Roger Josie actually made the donation, and Carol was the delivery person that brought it in to us and filled out the paperwork and so forth of that Garner registration. And Angela Cornick came tonight with a picture of the 1959 7th grade basketball team from Fight School, the new old Fight School.
The last fight school, remember what you called that? No.
And
Yeah.
she's taking it back with her because it has everybody identified on the back, and my brother Bill put me, and we thought it needed to be corrected to show his name as well as the other team members. But Edgar Chandler, who we have an exhibit on upstairs, is also in that ball team. So that's kind of an important picture, and it's going home and having a little more information added, and it'll be brought back. Is Miss Heather Shore. She's the Executive Director of the Chieftains Museum, and she's going to be presenting our program tonight, and I'm just going to turn it over to Miss Heather.
I didn't expect such a large crowd on a rainy night, so we may have to share some of the handouts. I apologize for that. I know last time I spoke, I used the projector and I was back and forth pointing, so I figured to keep you from getting motion sickness, I'd just stand and speak this time. But thank you for, I'm going to slide this to me a little bit. See how that goes. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you for inviting me back. I'm glad that it was by popular demand and not desperation. That makes me feel good. You never know with history. You never know. And the last time I was here, I spoke to you about Major Ridge and the life of Major Ridge and kind of how our museum ties into all of that. So this time I'm going to speak to you about another member of the family. This time it is Major Ridge's nephew, Stand Watie, who was a Confederate general. So you'll learn a little bit about him. Chances are some of you may know more about him than I do, but I will give you the details that I know. A lot of people think that once the Cherokee go west, once the Trail of Tears is concluded, that's it. They're just happy Cherokee roaming around in Oklahoma. Nothing ever happened again. But that's not the case at all. There actually was a long span of turmoil and strife and division within the Cherokee Nation that is really capped off by the American Civil War. But to understand how you get there, you have to understand a little bit about what came before. And we'll kind of do that looking through Stand Watie's life. So who was Stand Watie? Who's this guy with a weird name? Well, yes, sir.
How did you say his name?
Stand Watie.
Watie.
That's the way I have been told to pronounce it. I've also heard it pronounced Watie before,
Right, that's what I heard.
but I've been told to pronounce it Watie, so I do, but we'll say Stand. He was born December 12th, 1806 at Uthkaloga Creek, which is basically Calhoun. So he's born there in Calhoun. And he has kind of an interesting upbringing. His Cherokee name, just to kind of give you an idea, was Dega Tega, which meant to stand firm or to stand fiercely, to stand strong. And from that, he was just called Stand. Now, there's something that you'll see in your handout that you may find a little interesting. And you will see on there that his father was David Watie, who was brother to Major Ridge. And I had just always taken this because I had learned about Cherokee history and kind of knew the story of it, but I had a Chinese visitor who came in the other day and said, "Why do two brothers have different last names?" And I thought, that's something that some people may not understand. So here's why that is. With the Cherokee, you typically had one name. You just had one name. For Ridge, it was Kanungdaklega. For Stand Watie, it was Degatega. So there you go. But if you were baptized, when you were baptized by missionaries, they would oftentimes take your Cherokee name and slide it down to your last name and give you a Christian first name. So Stan's father would have been just named Watie, but when he was baptized, he became David Watie. Stan himself was baptized as Isaac Watie, but he drops the U and the Isaac and just goes by Stand Watie. So that's how you get that name. Whereas Major Ridge was just called Ridge, and then he actually achieved a military rank of major in the War of 1812 and took that as his first name. So that's why two brothers have these two different names, even though they have the same parents. So Stand is kind of interesting. He has several brothers and sisters. His sisters are Nancy, Mary, and Elizabeth. His brothers include John, Thomas, and Charles. And he has another brother named Buck. But Buck will change his name as he gets older. He will change it to reflect the name of a New Jersey statesman, and he will become Elias Boudinot. So that is the brother of Stand Watie. Exactly. So both Stand Watie and Elias Boudinot are nephews of Major Ridge. You can see that it's a very interesting family for everything that happens in the Cherokee Nation and with Cherokee politics. Now, Stand was considered to be a little rambunctious when he was growing up. He was considered to be an excellent horseman, or horse boy, I guess, at that time. He was a very good stickball player. He was short in stature, but he was considered to be very strong for his size. And he was pretty fierce as well. And that will lead into his adult life. He will speak only Cherokee until the age of 12 when he goes to the Brainerd Mission School in Tennessee. There he learns English, so he will be bilingual. He has an interesting love life as well. He will be married twice before the Cherokee are removed. His first wife is named Betsy, and unfortunately she and her child will both die during childbirth in 1836. His second wife was the former wife of Eli Hicks. Her name was Isabella Hicks, and they are married, but they decide to call it quits when the westward movement happens. So he will have an interesting love life. Now, as he grows up, he will also be a prominent part of everything that happens with Cherokee politics and in the Cherokee Nation, just like the rest of his family. So he will also be a farmer, a plantation owner, a slave owner, but he will come to play an important role in the political system. In 1829, he is clerk of the Cherokee National Supreme Court. And his brother Elias Boudinot, some of you may know him from the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper. He was the editor there. And when he goes in 1832 on a speaking tour in the East, Stan takes over for him at the newspaper, which causes a little bit of tension because by that time you're starting to have pro-treaty and anti-treaty factions, and who controls the press? Well, we've all seen how that goes with elections, haven't we? We know how that can go. He will also be a fierce supporter of the treaty, along with many members of his family. So, as you learned last time, of course, the Cherokee are faced with some very hard decisions once you get into the 1830s about what they're going to do, particularly within the state of Georgia. You have a pro-treaty faction that is led by Major Ridge that includes several other people, but from his family, his eldest son, John Ridge. It also includes Elias Boudinot and Stand. They are pro-treaty advocates, meaning that they believe the best thing for their people is to sign a treaty with the United States and move west in exchange for land there and compensation to their people. That very party meets in what is now Chieftains Museum several times before they go on to sign the Treaty of New Echota in 1835, which states they will do just that. There is a whole other faction of Cherokee, however, who don't believe you should sign a treaty. They are the National Party or Anti-Treaty Party under John Ross, and they don't think that that should happen. For the United States, signing that treaty is just fine with them, and they ratify it by one vote in 1836 and give the Cherokee 2 years to clear out and move. So they have until 1838 to leave. The Ridges will go ahead and leave. I guess I should say Ridges and Waties. They will go ahead and leave in 1837, and they will travel to what is Indian Territory. So you will see Cherokee and what will become Arkansas, Oklahoma, all through that area. And you actually see in the handout that I gave you that there is a map of Indian Territory and the people who migrated there. It's important to remember a couple of things with this. First of all, the Ridges and the Waties were not on the Cherokee portion of the Trail of Tears. That causes some resentment. There's also resentment because they signed the treaty. The other thing that's important for you to notice is that it's not just the Cherokee who are packed into this one place. It's a lot of different tribes. It's a lot of different nations that are now expected to squeeze into this one place and live together. Gee, doesn't that just happen well all the time? So needless to say, once the Cherokee finish the Trail of Tears and are out west, there's already a stage set for conflict. One of the main conflicts comes from the fact that they don't call it the Trail of Tears because it was a great time on the road. It started out as the trail where we cried for that very reason, because there was so much death, there was so much struggle, there was so much strife that you have about 4,000 Cherokee die on the way west. That's a quarter of their nation. And now people are looking to see who was responsible. And they believe that the leaders of the treaty party were responsible. Now, it wasn't just this family that signed the treaty. There were actually 20 people who signed the treaty. But they are seen as the leaders, so they are seen as people to blame. Once all the Cherokee get out to the west, they make good on a law that had been part of the Cherokee Council's ruling years before, which said if you give up Cherokee land, you can be killed for it. And they set their sights on the people who signed the treaty. In December of 1839, that comes to pass. Unfortunately, you have assassinations of 3 of the main leaders of the treaty party. Major Ridge had traveled into Arkansas, and he was coming back home, and his horse stopped to drink from a creek, and he was shot 5 times from his horse and killed. His son John was basically dragged out of his bed early in the morning, was stabbed 25 times and kicked to death in front of his wife and children. They witnessed it. Elias Boudinot had been at a missionary's house, Samuel Wooster, who's very well known in Cherokee history. And some Cherokee came to the door and said they needed him to go with them to get some medicine to help them. So he rode out with them, and when he got out into the field with them, they stabbed him to death. All within an hour of each other, these 3 men are lost. Now, Stand was also on that list to be killed, but something happened, and he was not included in that tragedy that day. There was an older son of Samuel Wooster, saw what had happened to Elias Boudinot, got on a horse, this is what the sources tell us, and rode out to a store that Stand Watie operated and told him what had happened, warned him ahead of time. And the story goes that he took off out of the store, got on the horse that the boy had left, and rode away. And he was able to get away. Unfortunately, his family wasn't. And this is something that he will never forget or forgive. The fact that his uncle, his cousin, and his brother had been killed. In fact, the first thing that he does is ride to Old Fort Wayne near the Arkansas border and rounds up about 15 different Cherokee and decides that he is going to take some action. They go to Fort Gibson, they try to organize, and he is going to find these assassins. But nobody's turning them in, and there's a lot of confusion. It's said that he actually goes to Samuel Wooster's house where his brother had been killed, and his brother's body was laying on the front porch, and that there were a lot of Cherokee that were there, many of whom had been anti-treaty Cherokee. And he rode up into the middle of them, and he got off his horse, and he walked up to the porch, and he uncovered his brother's face so he could see it for himself. And he turned around and he offered $10,000 to anybody who would tell him who had done it. He meant business. Unfortunately, nobody did. Rumors flew, gossip flew. He is chased around the countryside by people who still want to kill him. He ultimately goes to Washington, D.C. He and a man named John Adair Bell, and they try to seek some compensation for what has happened to their family. They try to explain what's happened, hold somebody accountable. But nobody is ever formally punished for this at all by the United States or by the Cherokee. Now, one person that Stand Watie blamed above all others was John Ross. He's the elected chief, he was the opposition party leader, and he blames John Ross right from the start when this happens. John Ross claims he doesn't know anything. Again, rumors fly. Years later, I can tell you that Alan Ross, John Ross's son, said that he was actually one of the guys that did it. But rumors are flying. And what it sets you up for is basically a blood feud that goes on for several years. When Watie comes back from Washington, D.C., he's trying to resume his life. He's trying to figure out who killed his family. One day, in 1842, he walks into a grocery store near Marysville, Arkansas, and he sees a man named James Foreman. James Foreman was one of the alleged assassins who had also sworn to kill him. Now, when you think about a store, you can't really think about Kroger. It's a different concept for a store. You can buy and trade things there, but you also have the most important element of a store, a bar. Have a bar at the time. So he walks right up to this man who was sworn to kill him and orders a drink. James Foreman orders a drink. And he turns to Stand Watie and he said, "I will drink to your life," which is obviously an open threat. Foreman pulls out a whip and starts to try to kill Stand Watie. And Stand Watie fights very hard. He will shoot him, he will stab him, and he will kill him. He will go on trial because he killed James Foreman, and he will be acquitted for self-defense. So he is able to get back at one guy, but I'm trying to get you the idea of the character and the temper of the time when it comes to this. He does have something good that happens to him in 1843. Remember the guy, John Adair Bell, who had gone to Washington with him? Well, he actually marries his sister, Sarah Caroline Bell, and you will see her on there. And I'm sorry that those are very fuzzy pictures. They're from a very fuzzy book, so that's kind of the best I can do. But it's with Sarah that he will actually have 5 children. They have 3 sons, Saladin, Comiskey, Watika, and 2 daughters, one who has the unfortunate name of Minnehaha Josephine, and the other is named Jacqueline. She's called Jessie. So they will have 5 children together. So his love life actually improves for him, even while all of this is going on. But you have to remember, this is a blood feud situation. You've had these people who have been removed from their home, and now they can't even get along where they are. It's so bad that in 1845, 1846, the United States has to get them together to negotiate a treaty among themselves to be able to have a Cherokee nation. They basically say this: we'll give amnesty to everybody. So if you have committed a crime, as long as you come back to the Cherokee Nation by a certain date, we'll just call it even. There will be equal protection for everybody, all the Cherokee under the law. There will be $115,000 in losses that are awarded to the Ridge family, including $5,000 apiece for every heir of Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot. That settles things down a bit, at least outside. What you have, however, are lovely seething thoughts and feelings that happen in the undercurrent that will spill over again once you get to the Civil War. You see, the John Ross faction, this anti-treaty faction, had more numbers. So they now control the Cherokee government. Stand Watie becomes the de facto leader of what was left of the pro-treaty party. So now you have kind of these factions. Not really, but a little bit. Now, as people, we would never do that, would we? We would never say one thing and mean another, would we? That would never happen. It didn't happen with the Cherokee either. But you see the situation that the Cherokee are in before we even get to the Civil War. By 1860, Stand Watie is living with his wife. He has his children. He's building a new home in Spavinaw in Oklahoma, near a lake and a river that are there, just in time for the American Civil War to kick into gear. Yay. Now, Indian Territory holds advantages for both sides in the Civil War, for both the Union and the Confederacy. It's seen as a transportation area. It can get you from here to there if you're going to western areas. It's seen as a provision storage area. It's seen as a raiding base. If we can have people here, then we can raid different areas and cover our backs. And they also see Native Americans as a very large fighting force that they can tap for their own uses. What you see with Native American nations, including the Cherokee, is what you see with the rest of the United States with the Civil War. They divide over what to do, often within their own tribe. There are a lot of people who just want to be neutral. That's their problem. We've got enough to worry about. There are others who want to side with the Confederacy. Why do you think a Native American will want to side with the Confederacy?
Federal government's done run over them once.
Exactly. We can get back at the United States. These people who have run us off of our homeland. We can get back at them. Why else do you think they might want to side with the Confederacy?
Maybe they were slave owners.
There were slave owners, exactly. Sorry?
The original home.
Mm-hmm. You can also get back at the people you don't like, right? So if the people you don't like are backing the other guy, this is a good way to do that. And you will see that. There's also something interesting geographically when it comes particularly to the Cherokee Nation, but to all Native nations. And you see that in your handout. I've got it kind of highlighted on a map there I found on Wikipedia. It's called the 37th parallel. The 37th parallel defines the southern borders of Utah, Colorado, and Kansas, and the northern borders of Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. So you kind of see it on there. You see that red line that's on that map. It actually came about as part of the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. And that's when that's kind of set. So basically you have Kansas and Nebraska to the north, you have Indian Territory to the south. Before the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it had been thought to be the boundary between the Cherokee and the Osage reservations. Now here's something really interesting that happens with Native nations. Those that live north of the 37th parallel tend to be pro-Union. Those that live south of the 37th parallel tend to be pro-Confederate. Part of that is because who your neighbors are. And then there are other reasons that we've outlined. Now, we talked about the Confederacy. What about the Union? Why would you want to side with the United States? Nobody wants to side with the Union in here. That's okay.
Repeat the question.
It's all right. Why, if you were a Native American, why would you want to side with the Union?
Why not?
Question with a question. Good play, sir. Good play. One of the reasons is because if you have been receiving some federal benefits, you don't want to mess those up, right? You don't want to mess that up. There's also a chance that if you lose, you're going to lose more, right? You may lose what you have if you get on the wrong side of this. Exactly. And you also do have Native Americans that are actually strong abolitionists that don't want anything to do with another side that might even court an ideal of slavery, even though we know that went both sides for everything. So you see how this kind of ends up happening in the Cherokee Nation and a lot of Native nations. There's something else that happens. In May of 1860, the United States withdraws its troops from Indian Territory. They think they're going to need them elsewhere. And that kind of leaves them there. So what happens now? Well, with the first wave of secession in January of 1861, you see some action with the Native American nations. The Chickasaw legislature recommends an intertribal conference to take place in February of 1861 to decide what to do. What do we do about this? It's scheduled for February 17th. But before that can even happen, February 7th, the Choctaw Nation says they support the Confederacy, and they side with the Confederacy. Once the intertribal conference happens, the conference basically concludes that Native nations should remain neutral. There's just one problem with that. The Choctaw have already sided with somebody, and the Chickasaw don't attend because they side with the Confederacy as well. By March of 1861, Jefferson Davis sends an agent to Indian Territory to try and garner Native American support. And he sends Albert Pike. We've all heard of Albert Pike before, right? He lived in Arkansas for a lot of years. He had a lot of Native American friends, and he had actually been a lawyer representing Native nations in Washington, D.C. in the 1850s. And they think this is the guy who can sign them up. So he goes out west. And here's what he's telling Native American nations. If you sign to support the Confederacy, you will get a guarantee of your land rights. You will be furnished with arms, and we will pay you $25 a head to fight for the Confederacy. We will also send you troops to help you. It's attractive for a lot of Native nations. Through all of this, the Cherokee say, we're going to remain neutral. And by the Cherokee, I mean the Cherokee government under John Ross. We're going to be neutral. This doesn't involve us. Nothing to see here. We're going to be neutral. Well, in May of 1861, the Chickasaw legislature officially votes to support the Confederacy. And it starts to have a snowball effect from there. By the time you get to fall of 1861, you will have the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Seminole all support the Confederacy. The Cherokee will end up doing the same. John Ross, once it gets into August of that year, he can no longer put off the fact that he's going to be drawn into this fight one way or the other. So he reluctantly agrees that the Cherokee will support the Confederacy. When that happens, you start to see Home Guard being organized, and you see an official side that the Cherokee take. Now, to get the Cherokee to take the Confederate side, they sweetened the deal. And here's how they sweetened the deal. They told the Cherokee that they could sell land in Indian territory that belonged to them if they wanted to. It's something the United States had told them they could not do. They also told the Cherokee that they would give them a representative in the Confederate Congress. This is something the United States never did. So Elias Boudinot's son, Elias C. Boudinot, will actually be elected to the Confederate House of Representatives, and he will serve as a representative in that house for the entire war. It's an easy way to draw the Cherokee in. But you have other Cherokee that don't support this. You see the divisions. You see the conflict. You end up with these two interesting sides. You have Confederate Indians, and then you have what are called Penn Indians that support the Union. Penn is P-I-N. And they were called that because they wore crossed pins on their lapel or on their collar to support the Union. The divisions have happened. These nations that were already ripped apart just a few decades before by moving have now basically done the same thing to themselves. Excuse me. The first battles of the Civil War in Indian Territory also take place in 1861. What you're going to see is a pattern throughout the Civil War in Indian Territory. You're going to see Native Americans that tried to remain neutral, that are caught up in all of the turmoil and will end up losing every single thing they have. Houses will be burned, farms are ruined, lives are ruined. And you see Cherokee and other Native Americans that flee. They flee from the area. You see a lot of refugees that head to Kansas to seek food and shelter with the Union, a Union that is not prepared in Kansas to give them food and shelter. So they will suffer a lot of starvation while they are there. You see a whole other group, many of these Confederate Native Americans, that will take their families and they will go to Texas to get away from what is going on. They will also suffer a lot of starvation, a lot of hardship there. They basically have to live in camps. And Stand Watie's wife, Sarah, will take their children and go to Texas during the war. They will be one of those families. A lot of the fighting that you see in Indian Territory in the Civil War, you see a list of battles on there, but there's a whole lot of guerrilla fighting that takes place in between. And that will cause a lot of conflict and a lot of turmoil. It's not just Native American territories. You see that in the Western Theater, and particularly the Trans-Mississippi West anyway. But it's not any different for Native Americans. So what about our man? What about Stand Watie? How does he fit into all of this? He has 50 mounted rifles for the Confederacy. It is a cavalry battalion. He is now a colonel, and he names his nephew, the same Elias C. Boudinot, as a major, before the Cherokee even declare they are for the Confederacy. He was not a scared man. The unit will end up becoming called the 2nd Cherokee Mounted Rifles after the Cherokee joined the Confederacy, because a pro-Ross faction gets the name of the 1st Cherokee Mounted Rifles, just so you know. He is a very fierce fighter. He is a very aggressive fighter. There is not much outside his modus operandi that he will not employ on the battlefield. And he is in a lot of different skirmishes and a lot of different conflicts. But I've got a few, and you can see them on your map, that kind of take you through what happens with the Cherokee in the Civil War. So the first one is the Battle at Wilson's Creek in August of 1861. That's in Missouri. It's a Confederate victory. There were approximately 1,000 Cherokee and Choctaw that were under Stand Watie's command at this. He will follow Albert Pike, who is now General Albert Pike, who will lead the native forces. So he comes out right out of the gate in 1861 with this fierce fighting. The next thing that you really see is the Battle of Pea Ridge, which is in northwest Arkansas in March of 1862. Now, Pea Ridge is important, even though it's a Union victory, because this is the only major engagement in which Indian Territory forces really participate in mass. It's a complete disaster for the Confederacy. But it is a victory for Stand Watie, because he and his men capture and still a Union artillery battery. They actually capture 3 cannons. And it's at this battle that his tactics and his leadership really make him stand out for the Confederacy. So that's important for him. He also became very severely feared from this. Let's just say that his men were not opposed to taking a few scalps along the way. You also have an interesting shift in 1862. By July of 1862, you have Union troops that have entered Tahlequah, which is the Cherokee capital, and they want to meet with John Ross. And John Ross says no. And the reason he says no is because he doesn't feel he should meet with him when he's actually aligned his people with the Confederacy. And they say, that's fine. Now you're coming with us. And they basically take John Ross prisoner. They also take a lot of the governmental documents for the Cherokee, the whole 9 yards, and they take him into Kansas. He is released not long after that, but he will spend the rest of the war in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C., trying to get relief for his people that are refugees and trying to make sure that his people don't get caught up in all of this once it's over. So the principal chief is gone. What a perfect opportunity for Stand Watie. And he comes out and declares, I'm the principal chief of the Cherokee. He's gone. I'm here. We align with the Confederacy. There's just one problem. There's actually another guy who has been given the power of John Ross, who was supposed to succeed him if he did have to leave for any reason, and that's Thomas Pegg. So you end up with 2 Cherokee nations. Stand Watie becomes the leader of what's called the Southern Cherokee. Thomas Pegg will be the leader of what becomes the Northern Cherokee for this period of time. It's a very strange time for them. Things, unfortunately, get worse for Native American nations in 1863. You start to see Confederate control of a lot of Indian territory that's waning. You will see a lot of problems even within the Cherokee Nation. You start to see a lot of Native Americans, including Cherokee, that are tired of the battles, they're tired of the struggle, and they basically quit. They just desert. We're not going to do this anymore. We are done with this. John Ross sends a message that he will offer amnesty to anybody who wants to give up. If you feel like you need to give up, do it. I will give you amnesty. So you see a lot of people who basically desert the Confederate Army, the Confederate military. You think that matters to Stand Watie? Not at all. He will remain loyal to the Confederacy. He will lead raids on Union troops. He will kill deserters. And in October of 1863, he does a couple of really big things. He goes to Tahlequah and he burns down the Cherokee government buildings there. And then he will burn down John Ross's house as well. Now, I ask you, was it because John Ross was a neutral supporter before, may have given amnesty to the deserters? You think that's why he did that? The suspicion is, and I think they're probably right, that this was a great way for him to exact revenge from years before when his family had been killed. And he flat did it. He took advantage of it and did it. He will actually go on from this to receive a commission and a promotion as a brigadier general in the Confederate military. In May of 1864, he is given that rank personally by Jefferson Davis because he has been leading so many raids, because he has been standing out, probably because he did burn John Ross's house down. So now he will be the only Native American general in the Confederacy. That's it. He is not the only Native American general in the Civil War, however. You had Eli Parker, who was a brigadier general for the Union, who's Native American. But he will be the only Native American general in the Confederacy. He does a couple of other things in 1864 that capture the imagination of some people and the attention of the Confederacy. There is a Union supply ship called the J.R. Williams, and he and his men capture it June 15th of 1864. It was bound for Fort Gibson, Oklahoma on the Arkansas River. They get the supply steamboat, they capture it, and they are able to get all of the supplies from it. That captures attention. The next thing he did, which is to me, that's kind of the most interesting thing he did in the war, is in September of 1864, he and his men actually managed to capture a supply wagon train near Cabin Creek in the northeastern part of Oklahoma. Now, the interesting thing about that is not just that he got supplies, it's that the wagon supply train had between $1 million and $1.5 million worth of supplies that they captured. Yeah. It's a lot of stuff. So it calls attention. On the flip side of this, however, both that steamboat and the Union wagon supply train had been bound for Fort Gibson. Fort Gibson had become a center for Native American refugees. So he was also taking the supplies from a lot of his own people, unfortunately. All of it wraps up in the war for Stand Watie in June 23rd of 1865, when he will surrender in Dokesville in Oklahoma. Now, the interesting thing about what's called the Battle of Dokesville is not the fact that it was a Union victory, and it's not the fact that he surrendered. It's the fact that this battle occurred 75 days after Robert E. Lee had surrendered in the East. He kept it going as long as he could. And he will be the last Confederate general to surrender in the Civil War. He keeps it going. So what were the effects on Indian territory from this whole war? Well, like we said, for some it was a chance to settle old scores. But at the end of the day, you may not have anything. Lack of very strong Indian nation governments leads to a lot of other problems associated with war. You have a lot of crime. You have a lot of looting. You have a lot of vandalism by both Native Americans and by whites that come there, and there's nobody there to punish them for it. The guerrilla warfare that I'd mentioned, it's not just by Native Americans. You have other people who come in and bring their own people, like, William Clark Quantrill and his raiders that come to Indian territory and do a lot of damage. Overall, the Cherokee and the Creek were hit hardest by crime, and the Choctaw by hunger. Another interesting thing that you have, the Penn Indians that I'd mentioned before and the Confederate Indians will remain divided after the war. A lot of what you see in other places in the United States. Just because somebody wins and somebody loses doesn't change somebody's mind. But a couple of things that I read in some sources really give you the impact on Indian territory in the Civil War, which of course included in large part by Stand Watie. The Civil War had as much effect on the people and the land in Indian territory as it did in South Carolina or in Georgia, when you're talking about destruction. And of the 5 civilized tribes that align with the Confederacy, if you think about the proportion of men, we're not talking numbers, we're talking about the proportion of men that are lost. Those 5 civilized tribes lost more men in proportion to the number enlisted than any other southern state. Some statistics to give you: you've got about 8,000 Native Americans that fight on either side of the war. You have 10,000 deaths. A lot of those are refugees. After the Civil War, it's estimated that 1 in 4 Cherokee children was orphaned and 1 in 3 Cherokee women was widowed. It is a lot like what you see in the American South after the Civil War. So we can't forget that. We have to remember that it didn't just happen here. There were a lot of other people that were involved. So what happens to Stand Watie after the war? What do you do after you've been a brigadier general for the Confederacy? Well, he went back home after a while. The first thing that he has to do is figure out, is he the leader of the Cherokee or not? Leader of the Southern Cherokee? Am I the leader of all the Cherokee? They have to figure that out. Actually, the Southern Cherokee and the Northern Cherokee both send delegates to Washington, D.C. for the 1866 negotiation of the Cherokee Reconstruction Treaty. John Ross is there. Stand Watie is there. Ross manages, for all the things I may have against John Ross, I have to say this for him. He manages to negotiate a united Cherokee nation again. And one of the ways he does this is he puts a provision, or has a provision put in there, that restores property to Southern Cherokee, gives them amnesty, and this way maybe they can come back together as a nation. The treaty is signed July 27th, 1866. John Ross dies 5 days later, August 1st. Interesting situation. What a difference 5 days can make. Now, don't think, however, that meant that Stand Watie was going to get to be the leader of the Cherokee. No. Because Ross was going to make sure that his faction came right back into the same power that it had. And that is secured in the treaty. The Ross faction does control the Cherokee government again, and Stand Watie loses what he considered to be his position as leader of the Cherokee. Once that treaty is signed, there's a noise. I'm almost done, promise. Okay. Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Once the treaty is signed, he truly can go back to his home. He goes back to Honey Creek. His family comes back from Texas. But unfortunately, it's not necessarily a happy life. While they were in Texas, his son Watika, his son Comiskey had died in 1863 while they'd been in Texas. After the war, his son Saladin would die in 1868. His son Watika will die in 1869. All of his sons have died after the war. He will try to put back his life as it was. He will be a farmer again. He will try to own stores again. Elias C. Boudinot, who I'd mentioned, actually had a tobacco plantation and tobacco farm, and he tries to help him with that. And he kind of leads a calm life for the last part of his life. He will die at his Honey Creek home September 8th of 1871. Unfortunately, for his children, the destruction and the tragedy doesn't end. Both of his daughters die in 1875. So all 5 of his children have died from the time of the Civil War until just a few years after his death.
What did he die of?
Who? Of Stand Watie? As far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody else knows, it was basically just old age by that time. He had been born in 1806. It's 1871. By then, at that point in time, that was an advanced age. And with his children, you see a lot of pneumonia, you see a lot of different illnesses. So it's an unhappy and kind of a anticlimactic end for a very fascinating man who lived through all of this Cherokee history, even the history that his own family members didn't get to live through with the Ridges and with his brother. He saw it before. He saw the nation in the East before. He saw removal and what happened. He saw the divisions in his own nation and even encouraged them in his own time. A fascinating man with a fascinating life. So for all of his fierceness, for all of his aggressiveness, apparently he did have another side. because there was a quote from the Fort Smith, Arkansas Herald about Watie and his death in 1871. And this is what it said about him. He was never known to speak an unkind word to his wife or children. He was never morose under any circumstances, and was kind to a fault. His house was the home of every Cherokee. There never lived a better man.
Did his wife survive him?
She did. From my understanding, she did. So an interesting man in interesting times, a bit of an auspicious end. But I hope next time you come to the museum, you will appreciate that this was part of his family. And I encourage you to find other sites, to go to New Echota, to go to these different sites where you can learn a little bit more about him, our only Confederate Brigadier General, Stand Watie. Thank you. What's making the noise? Was it this one?
Get that.
I didn't do that one.
No, I just unplugged the cord completely. Thank you so much, Heather. We
Sure.
do appreciate you making the trip down here on this very rainy, wet night.
Hey, I appreciate everybody listening and not going to sleep.
It was hard.
And I hope that you all have enjoyed it. Is there anything else that we need to say before we dismiss our lovely refreshments? No.
Any questions?
Any questions for Heather?
I will attempt to answer. I can't guarantee I can, but I'll try.
How did you gain all this knowledge?
I read a lot.
Is this your specialty?
Well, actually, my degree is in public history, which is museum studies. But I taught museum studies and I taught U.S. history for so long that you pick up on different things along the way. But one of the most important things about being a historian is you know how to find out about something, even if you don't know a lot about something. So I knew the basics of Cherokee history before I came to the museum 3 years ago, but since then I've read a lot about the family and a lot about Cherokee history and culture.
Do a great job.
Thank you. I made it all up.
No, you didn't.
That's the key.
So you know this is part of the Cherokee Nation right here.
Indeed. All of North Georgia
You
is.
know that Collard Valley is named after Chief
Chief Collard. I do indeed.
Why did you bring this up?
It was just Stan tonight. Bring me back another time. We'll talk about Chief Collard.
Maybe by popular demand, we'll have her back again one day. I left my agenda laying over there, and I think there was one other thing that I meant to mention, but I don't know what it is, so if you get an odd email, you'll know I remembered whatever it was I was going to say. If anyone has any particular interest or anyone that they want us to consider as the board member at large, please let me know after the meeting. Well, this doesn't give me a clue as to what I was going